Kevin, while you're waiting for that, there'll be some documents that need to be shared. If you can go into the screen share and allow everyone to share those, then anything that Nikki or Terry or I have, we can share.
All right. Hold on. Zoom and YouTube are having a problem communicating, so I'm working with it. Hang on just a minute.
Mine just popped up and said we're live on YouTube.
Yep, mine did too. All right. Screen share. I'll just put it down as all participants can share. And pause just a second, please. While I All right, Suzanne will be calling in. However, in the interim, let's get this meeting called to order, and Michael McNamara is doing the Pledge of Allegiance today. So let me get the flag up here. Here we are.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America,
to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and
justice for all.
All right, with that, Rick, would you like to present your budgets?
Do you want to do public comment, or you didn't have anybody signed in?
Oh, I'm sorry. We did not have anybody for public comment, so you are free to take the floor.
Okay. I'm going to let Nikki start with her 1920 final budget. We've talked about it in committee last week, but Nikki, why don't you go over that briefly, and then we'll start talking about ideas for next year.
Okay, the June 2020 budget workshop overview document that you received for tonight, it has, I'd say towards the middle of the page, the fund balance effects of that latest cut in foundation allowance. As you can see there, here, maybe I can does everyone have a copy of that, or would you like me to share on the screen maybe?
It's this one.
Yes.
You go ahead and share it, Nikki. That's fine.
Let me see if I can. Okay. Okay. Can you see this guy?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So with the latest reduction in foundation allowance here, of we're estimating 700, even though it's it could be less than that. So and our blended student count for this year, this is the cut here, this $1.876 million cut to the 1920 budget. We did some rearranging. We're pretty late in the game here to cut anything. The purchasing window ended May 15th, so folks are already, not supposed to be purchasing additional items regardless. So what we did do is we pulled back some of the funds that we'd moved to capital projects in an effort to, soften the blow here. But in the end, what you'll see on Monday at the board meeting in detail is that this year's budget, this takes a toll on our fund balance, of course, and we drop down to a 9.19% fund balance, budgeted fund balance at the end of this year. Of course, it will be better than this, as always, but this would be the conservative estimate. And as I said, Rick and I talked, and there wasn't much we could do this late in the game. Really, what's left to hit the budget is staffing. So aside from making staffing decisions right now for contracts that go into the summer, there really isn't anything else we could do. We did reach out to MT. I know John had asked about that. They were not willing to revisit our contract for the copy machines. But yes, so this is what you'll see in detail on Monday in the final revision. Does anyone have any questions about that piece?
Did we reach out to First Student or is it Edu staff that we use now to see if anything they could do there? Did either one of them get PPP loans or anything, or we find anything out about that at all, Rick? You're muted.
Oh, I'm muted, that's right.
You're unmuted now.
There we go. Okay, so, you know, the pay for those groups are coming to an end as of Tuesday next week. So there wouldn't be a large amount to recapture there. I don't believe that either one of them have applied for or gotten the loans. So again, at least for this year, the 1920 budget, I don't see there being any savings there.
I think we just need to remember moving forward when this happens that we gotta take an axe to it pretty quickly, because I know you and I talked about it back in April.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, that wasn't the guidance, and it really wasn't the thing that most places were doing. And moving into next year, if we are in an environment that doesn't require services, my hope is that isn't the guidance, because like you said, there's savings to be had there that doesn't touch instruction.
Right. Yep. Okay.
Milt, you had something to say?
Yeah. Is it positive that they're going to pull back that funds, or thought I heard some talk where they weren't going to do it?
I haven't, and maybe Nikki knows more, but I have not heard yay or nay on that. The associations, of course, are recommending that you plan for the worst and cross your fingers, but we don't know of anything that's imminent that would change fiscal 1920 or 2021 at this point.
Okay, thanks.
When do we traditionally get our payment each month from them? Or
The 20th of every month.
the 20th? Okay.
Mhm.
And did we get it for May?
Yep, and May was just the usual payment. There wasn't a cut in it yet, so
Okay.
May was good.
Okay.
Hey, Nikki, how will they pull it back? In one lump sum, or what would they do?
So they pay through the end of August. So really they have 3 more payments left, and they wouldn't have to pull anything back. They would be reducing our total and then dispersing less, because we have enough months left to make up for that cut, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, so in essence, it really wouldn't be a pullback. It would just be a reduced payout.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions on fiscal 1920 and where we end there or why? That one's pretty clear, really, about the only, except for the 158, 120, the only place that we could account for the 1.876 was to reduce fund balance.
All right, John?
John's muted.
You're muted, John.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Can hear you now.
I was saying, do we have the cash and reserves to cover these non-payments for the next, 4 months.
Yes. Yes, we do.
All right, then.
Okay.
No other, statements,
So-
moving on.
Then we move into the discussion, which should be the main course here this evening, to talk about fiscal 2021. And our anticipation is that the reduction in the fund balance will carry forward and decrease by that same 700. So we have the same target number of 1.876 and some change, based on our blended count. There's a table down below that shows some of the potential cuts, and we've been working on another one. I'll screen share this document to talk about what we've done so far to edge toward that number, and then what some of the other areas are that we could go into to get the rest. So is everybody looking at that one? Should I enlarge it a little bit?
I'm good.
Okay. So these are some of the budget assumptions that I'm going to reduce in the budget for next year in our planning. And the goal here was to try to take portions of several things without completely taking an entire entity out. And also trying to stay as far away from the classroom in the first round as we could. So that's the approach in these numbers. So we would reduce our administration by 1 building principal. The savings is noted there. We would reduce our custodial staff by 2. That's primarily related to the closure of 1 building. And maybe we could mine out 1 more position. We wanted to be a little bit careful there because keeping a sanitary environment is going to be, I think, a part of everything that we're going to need to consider. So we didn't wield the axe any further than the 2 positions until we have some guidelines and some knowledge on what it's going to take to clean everything if we're face to face. Security positions. This is also related to partly to the closure at Herrick Park, but also reducing a couple other positions throughout the district by a total of 3 people. Administrative assistants, that's building secretaries. There are some reductions that could be absorbed in this worst case scenario, total of 3. The reduction of 1 maintenance person. We currently have 3 elementary librarians. We would reduce that by 2 and have a person running all of the libraries a little bit at a time. We have the team program. Those teachers, we would pull those numbers out of the budget. Some of the non-personnel savings related to the closure of the East Steam, that can only be an estimate because we don't know what those actual costs are. But in terms of setting the budget, we've chosen a number that would be conservative and realistic. The transportation savings based on the 3 to 3.5 routes that would change based on the reorganization, not only of the buildings, but also in the routes. That saving is significant. We've talked about the school nurse. Was in a meeting earlier this week that with the health department, they're actually going to be recommending that districts that don't have a school nurse go find one. So we're in a pretty advantageous position. We already have one. She's currently budgeted for I believe 32 hours a week. Is that right, Terry? So this would be an increase in the nursing budget because we just feel like that there's going to be an increased need for the medical support for testing, temperature taking, response, all of the things that you might think of in terms of medical. We're also going to pull back the general fund contribution to the community pool. The community pool has its own 0.25 mil collection on local taxes. So there is a portion, the large portion of their funding comes from that quarter mil. We would just be pulling out the 44. Potentially, that's money that could grow back in that budget. There have been years when programs that were offered, swim lessons and tiger sharks and other participation fees have amounted to that level of funding. So it's possible that they could raise their own money to keep their budget at the current level. We're just going to say that the district isn't going to contribute out of the general fund. With all that said, it gets us to $847,052. And then you have to drill down into some other areas. We haven't at this point talked about a reduction in building level discretionary amounts. And we haven't done that yet because we just don't know what we can afford to do without. And at the same time, we know that we're going to have to purchase more Chromebooks than we usually budget for. Typically in the budget, an additional 400 Chromebooks is budgeted for. Chromebook with a license is about $200. So there's about 80,000 in the budget already for 400 Chromebooks. We're suggesting that we may need another 500 on top of that, but we could use at least a portion of the CARES Act money that we were appropriated to cover those costs. So we're not looking at that purchase as a hit to the budget or a savings. Then you get to the reduction of certified staff, removing teachers from the roster and then building a schedule that is based on the number that results. Our estimate is between 7 to 9 people. And it used to be that when you budgeted for a layoff, you could just go to the salary schedule and count the number of employees up until you got to a number. But layoffs are now connected to evaluation score. Evaluations will be complete on Friday. So at that point, then we would be able to get into doing the addition to find out how deep into the staff you would have to go to get the extra almost $1 million that you would have to save to get a balanced budget. Again, and I've told the staff this, setting the budget for July 1st doesn't necessarily mean that that's the program that will be opened when school begins. But we have to have a budget by July 1st, and we don't know what our income is going to be, in this case, probably well into October. So we have to start with something. And that's an area that the certified staff, as you can see in the other document, we spend about $13.6 million in certified staff. So when you're reducing those employees, you get to $1 million relatively quick. We're talking about the restructure of the business services. I know Monday night, the board is going to decide if we're going to continue a contract with the ISD for business services or bring that back within our organization. We have kind of wrapped that into business services and the HR position based on the fact that we have accepted Mrs. Keebler's resignation. So when you take what we're spending on business services currently, which is about $265,000, and the salary and benefit package for the current HR director, we're somewhere around $350,000 total that we spend. And we are talking about bringing that back within the organization and keeping the number in the budget for the total package at $300,000. That would probably be a budget director, an HR person, and a couple of support people between payroll, accounts payable, some accounting, those sorts of things. We don't have them specifically designed yet. We were more at this point shooting for a number. And currently between business services and HR, there are 6 individuals. If we reduce it to a total of 4, we believe that we can get to 300,000 or potentially less. But fattening that number up just a little bit to be conservative in terms of reduction. We also have talked about reductions in athletic transportation in a new environment. It's going to be probably difficult with CDC guidelines to transport by bus anyway. So that may be a number that we could estimate in looking at the athletic budget. And then the board has also talked about pay to play and the numbers that generate. We have looked back historically through pay to play, and the numbers range from somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000 income based on what we have charged in the past and participation levels. That's also a difficult target to shoot for or to budget for. It would probably be wise to, if you were going to budget for income to balance the budget, you would budget on the lower end of that range that I mentioned. So maybe 50,000 if you were going to use that number to help balance the budget. So that's what we have suggested so far. And these are the ideas to spring conversation and let you ask questions, make suggestions under other areas to consider so that we could come back to the board with some real numbers for discussion at the January 8th or June 8th board meeting. So I've talked a lot. I will listen now and entertain questions and thoughts.
Anyone? All right.
I'm for putting the pay to play back in. I mean, without a doubt. So, I know we have a good fit support on the fan club side, and if there's some kids that are having some difficulties, I'm sure we can fundraise for them to be able to play. Have we looked at? Do we know how many teachers are planning on retiring this year, Rick? So,
We have none indicated at this point.
okay.
I've seen situations in the past in my experience where individuals will wait to see what the final outcome is going to be in terms of budget. And if they were going to maybe wait 1 year and retire, but they look at something like this and say, hey, if I can save a couple of teachers' jobs, I'll go ahead and retire now. That's just the way that lots of people are wired. So talking about this and maybe adopting it in the budget would create some interest in retirements.
Don't we have a policy where they have to give us by a certain date they get? I don't know what the cash. I think it was like.
Yeah,
200.
it was minimal. It was like $300 if they
Okay.
they let us know by March 1st. But that day has come and gone, and the incentive, small though it may have been, has passed. And we don't have anybody right now that has indicated that they want to retire.
All right,
We looked
Becky.
at-
Rick,
Oh,
and
sorry,
that,
Tim.
oh, go ahead, Tim.
Have we looked at maybe offering buyouts and what those would look like, saving the district money, or? I mean, I know we got some teachers that are.
That's a
that could easily
conversation that,
retire.
yeah, that's an item that we could list under other areas to consider. You know, we would have to go to the association and, you know, typically when you do that, you say that it's got to be a minimum of maybe 10 or 15 people so that it works out to be mutually beneficial.
Right.
But yeah, we can certainly formulate those numbers if from this discussion it is something that everybody's interested in. The
All
only
right,
thing
Becky.
that I get concerned about, and I know there's been already decent turnover in the last 3 years here in Tecumseh, that just losing that experience is sometimes a value that you don't put in dollars.
Now, Becky.
I was just gonna ask, in the 2021 budget considerations, on the very top, you've got athletics, but that's not really broken out. Is the athletic transportation in that number? What else does that reflect?
Yeah, athletic transportation is in that number, and Nikki can do a better job of breaking it down, but it's salaries, transportation, officials, equipment. What are some of the other major things, Nikki?
$45,000 of that is athletic transportation for this year. That was the budget for this year. And then, yeah, salaries, the director, the administrative assistant, all of the officials. I'd say 60% of the coaches are in that number because the other portion of the coaches are paid for by fundraised activity funds. And then, actually just I think it's like 75 or 85,000 is supplies for the department. Most of the equipment and you know, uniforms and things like that are fundraised as well.
Right. I'd asked about it in the committee because I wanted it kind of further broken out for us. I'd
Sure.
really like to see that.
Yeah,
Because that's a huge chunk of money right there.
I can yeah, I can send that out, no problem at all. Let me pull it
Thanks.
up. Yep.
All right, John, you're up.
There were just a couple things that I had concerns about. The big one was the custodians. I think we're actually going to need more custodians based on the CDC guidelines and what I've seen. Because I know our current staff, we were running into some issues earlier in the year with, you know, the school and its cleanliness. So I struggle with that 51,000 in the custodians. When I was reviewing the shared services agreement and some of the money that we spend on that, I can definitely see some savings in there. I don't know how much that'll be, but there's definitely some savings in there. And then as far as buyouts go, we have to be very careful with our cash this year. We can't be spending cash to save money down the road. And I agree with Rick. We have to be very careful about losing, you know, some of our teachers who have been here for a long period of time, who are kind of a staple in our schools. So I'm not sure if I'd be, interested in looking at buyouts right away. I think that would be kind of a last ditch effort, especially if we have to spend money on top of what we would already spend to save down the road. I think our focus right now has to be saving money immediately, not the effects that it's going to have 3 to 5 years down the road. And that's it.
Right. And another thing that I thought of, and I guess I shouldn't make the assumption, but for this discussion, we didn't talk about dipping into fund equity at all. And we're already at a projected 9.19%. My assumption there is the board would not be interested in trying to create more savings by shrinking that number. But if anybody wants to talk about that, I'd be willing to listen.
Milt, you were up.
Rick, have you considered, like, I know in the past we had AD in the high school become AD and assistant principal. Is that on the board, or?
It's certainly something that we can put on the other areas to consider. A district our size and the number of programs that we have certainly has plenty to do for a full-time athletic director. If the number of programs that are offered and the length of season is maintained. If we go back to an environment where you know, the number of contests during the year is going to be reduced, and you know, some of the responsibilities would shrink along with that, we could certainly find a spot for that in the budget and you know, reassign some of his duties somewhere else administratively. What we have the benefit with John in that he's got his athletic administration certification, but he's also got K-12 building certification. So there's some flexibility there, certainly.
What about, would it be any savings for, if you're closing Herrick Park for the administrative office move there? Would that be less expensive to run out of there? Close the ag building down totally?
Oh, close the building we're in right now and use the Herrick Park building?
Right.
There could be some energy costs related to that that would be saved. Hadn't thought about that one, so that's a good one to add to the list, and we could cook up some numbers that might.
You know, the school could market that building by ourselves, so.
Yeah. Yeah, it might. It would maybe adjust some of Nikki's numbers on her savings for snow removal and things like that if we had to continue to maintain that at a level for a working building, but those are relatively small numbers. The custodial increase would be minimal, but you know, there could be, we would have to probably adjust those utilities and snow removal.
Just thought I'd throw it out there.
Yeah. Yeah, there's, I mean, as soon as we talked about closing Herrick Park, I've received several thoughts and ideas of how other people might use that building. So I'd probably be surprised if it does actually sit in mothballs, but we'll see.
All right. We have Becky, you had something to say?
You did.
You're muted, Becky.
I unmuted it when you unmuted it. Continuing on what Milt was saying, was the city marketing that? There was something going on with the admin building?
Well, the city received a status that would allow us to access a group that would market the building.
Okay.
And I think that's being done, but we're not hearing anything about it.
That was my next question. Have we gotten any response? Okay. So you said you've received some inquiries about Herrick Park. Would they be inquiries that make money?
If it was established as a childcare center for, in the case of a hybrid plan, and you know, kids were only allowed to go to school for certain times of the day, but still needed somewhere to be because parents needed to work. given whatever guidelines there might be, we could probably spread them out into those classrooms. But, you know, there would be additional staffing costs too. So it's hard to tell what that income might be.
Okay, thank you.
But that was the main conversations that I've had is using it for that. We've also talked about if we are back in session and we do have trouble with spreading the number of kids out, that maybe some of the grade levels could spread out into that building or even this
Right.
this building. So still waiting to see what those guidelines are. In phase 5, which we're kind of inching toward being in phase 5, maybe sometime this summer, face-to-face instruction is allowed, but that's a guideline. It doesn't talk about under what circumstances or how it might work. Now, the CDC guidelines have been out and we have talked about them. We've talked mostly about them being somewhat unrealistic, but they are guidelines. They're not mandates. So we would have to wait to see if there was guidance from the state saying you must use these or you should go by some of these recommendations before we could say we needed to use more square footage for students.
Oh, that kind of takes us into the problem that we've been talking about is, you know, we think we could save some money with cutting 3.5 of the bus routes, but like you're saying, if we have to social distance the buses, we might have to add those in.
Yeah.
It's just
Significantly.
right. I think John had kind of summed it up in the committee that he'd like us to look at as if we were going to be in class. So I kind of think we have to lean that way a little bit.
Right, because
of
that's the most
anticipating that.
expensive version of the program.
Right.
All right, thank you, Becky. John, you're up.
What Milt said about the admin building triggered something. I think that we have spaces outside of Herrick Park that we could move people from the admin building into, if I'm not mistaken. And I know that the numbers for closing the admin building are out there somewhere because we talked about it during the reconfiguration process.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it might have been somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 to close that building. But that's another thought, is to move the admin offices to other buildings. You may not all be able to be in the same building, but I believe that there's space at Compass and the high school that could accommodate your offices.
Okay, that's something that we'll look at and develop costs related to it or savings.
That way we wouldn't have to, because I like the idea of maybe moving you to Herrick Park, but we wouldn't have the utility savings. And I don't know if it makes sense to try to heat and cool that entire building for, a handful of staff. So you'd probably be better suited to stay in the admin building.
Well, to that, I don't know as it makes a lot of sense to heat and cool the entire admin building for a half dozen offices either. So maybe the best solution out of that discussion would be, hey, can we leave Herrick Park and the admin building idled and maybe save money in both those buildings just by moving the admin offices to the other buildings in the district? Jim?
Yeah, there is certainly for next year at least, by putting the 7th grade students in what's currently the 2nd grade wing at Compass and not putting preschool into that area. And that does loosen up some capacity in the Compass building for, like you mentioned, administrative spaces or offices.
Well,
And
I know
the
at one time,
counseling office at the high school has been a part of the discussion for a while.
Yeah, at one time they even had plans drawn up to move the board offices into the high school. So,
Yeah,
and then move the counseling offices down where the um, main offices are there in the high school. So, but it
All
all
right.
takes money.
Yeah. Question is it gonna take more money to move than it's gonna save over the course of the year? Milt, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I'm just on the busing issue. Have we considered to start charging for the busing? I mean, it has been done in the past, not in Tecumseh, but in towns where I grew up, they charged for busing back then. That was a long time ago.
it's true, transportation is not a mandate. It is not something the districts must offer. So it's possible that you could come up with a fee schedule. You probably would at that point run into some school of choice issues. So that would be the, biting off your nose to spite your face conversation.
Yeah.
All right. It looks like, Tim, did you have something to add to that?
No, I was just gonna say just what Rick said. I mean, I think we'd lose more students. People, then go to the disc. We already got buses coming into town. So if we're gonna be charging for people in town, they'll say, well, I'll jump on the bus that's from out of town. So
Yeah.
I think we would end up losing more students and revenue because of it. So
Yeah. There's no way to budget. You mentioned students and revenue. There's no way really to anticipate right now our FTE for next year, and whether or not the kindergarten class coming in is going to match the numbers of seniors going out, whether or not through advertising we add to the roster of the TVA. And there's also really right now, there's no knowing exactly how budgets are going to be tabulated next year. It could be that the guidance just comes out from the state that says there's an FTE freeze and everybody's going to get the same FTE this year that they got last year. And we're not going to worry about a blended count come 2021. I have heard scenarios like that, so that if there is a large number of families who decide to homeschool, that a district doesn't have an unknown 200 FTE that they also have to budget for when the doors open. So I don't know exactly how to advise the board on that yet. And that's why I didn't put anything in there in terms of potential increase or decrease in our FTE.
Muted. Sorry about that. Thank you, Rick. John?
I was just gonna say, one of the things that we should probably add to the budget cuts and savings is a line item for advertising. Because I think we are gonna wanna, I don't know what our advertising budget is. I'd like to know what that is, if we even have one. But I think, one of the things that we should probably be doing is advertising the TVA, so we can pull in some additional students.
John, I used some of the CARES Act money and increased the advertising budget for the TVA by $10,000, which was double what we had spent in the past.
Thank
And
you.
we're looking into not just print media, but radio and television as well.
Sounds good.
And
All
that,
right.
because it's CARES Act money, doesn't impact our general fund.
Okay. Thank you. And Becky?
Since Suzanne's not here, I know what she would add to Milt's idea about the buses. While I agree with Tim, I think we'd lose people if we did that. But as Hilderly said, this isn't a mandate. We could ask people that need it to sign up for it. So we're not sending buses down routes that the kids are getting driven to school. You can go by any school during drop off and pickup and know that there's a lot of parents that take their kids and pick them up. So that might be something to think about going forward, that you need to sign up for the bus route so that
Right.
we know who's utilizing it.
The other thing about bus routes that we haven't done is we're trying to stick to the general guidelines that we've had in the past of no more than an hour-long bus ride.
Mhm.
If we extended that to include a 90-minute threshold, you would then shrink your routes also. Again, is there some risk in that of a parent who lives near a boundary district who's willing to transport in under that 90 minutes? There's a risk that a family might say, fine, if my kid's got to be on the bus for an hour and a half, I'll send them over here where they're only going to be on for 40 minutes. There's
Right.
risk.
Indeed. All right. Thank you, Becky. Do we have any other comments on this topic? Oh, looks like John.
I was just gonna say, I don't know if we have done this in the past, but I think one of the issues with the bus routes has always been that, you know, we go by the roster and where we think kids are gonna be, but it might not be a bad idea this year to make it mandatory for people to actually sign up for the bus. You know, we're not gonna automatically go places where we think there may be students. We actually have to have people sign up for it. And they may only ride the bus once a week, but at least if we had a mandatory sign up for bus service, we would know where we have to go. And, you know, we should probably try to get something like that taken care of by August 1st. So we have time to adjust the routes.
Okay, yeah, I'll talk with Ben about that.
Thank you, John. To add to the bus discussion before I get to Milt, I think that even in an hour, it's a little bit discouraging as a parent, having been in that situation where it takes our kid an hour to get home from school. You end up picking them up as much as you can, and then the bus is running by your house without stopping anyway. I think the risk of pushing it out to an hour and a half is probably pretty high, particularly with elementary school kids, the younger set. And when you get up to high school, a lot of those high school kids, they're home for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and then they're back out for whatever activity they're going to in the evening. That extra half hour on their bus routes is probably not going to work for them either. Milt?
Just curious, is this $700, Rick, still just the worst case scenario, or is it a hard number?
Yeah, no, we're budgeting for the worst case scenario. I've heard that there are places that are planning on 500. I wouldn't advise that at this point. I don't see any information that says that that's a good idea. So we're going on worst case scenario at this point.
Okay.
All right. Is there any other discussion on this?
What we'll do is we'll take the information from tonight's discussion and we'll start to crunch numbers again so that on Monday, you can see this document again with some additional information. The breakdown of the athletic budget that Becky talked about and some of the scenarios with closing this building and maybe using other spaces. We'll put some numbers on those things. It'll be on the agenda as a discussion item again. And then between the 8th and the 22nd, we could have another budget workshop where we really start to get serious about what are the things that we most want to consider. And then the June 22nd meeting is the budget hearing where we have to have a proposal. The only other option would be to delay that meeting 1 week and try to buy a little bit more time and then make the budget hearing June 29th. You just have to have it before that deadline. So those are the options, and that's the timeline that I'm recommending is one more discussion at the board meeting, one more board workshop, and then final decision making for the budget on the 22nd, or if the board wishes to move it 1 week further and maybe hope for some change in the information. What can happen between now and then with evaluations for teachers coming in this week is that probably by a board workshop, I could give you real numbers as to how far the cut would have to go into certified staff.
I have
All
a-
right.
when we've done the buyouts before, when we talk about a buyout, it's not like a $20,000 buyout. I mean, what was the number when we've done those in the past? Do you know, Rick? Or
In my experience here, the buyout number has ranged from a one-time large number like 30,000
okay,
to $10,000 payments over maybe 2 or 3 years.
okay,
So there are different ways that you can approach that. And then the hope is that you buy out people on the top end of the salary schedule and then
right,
either, don't replace those positions or, you find savings and new hires that help balance the budget.
right.
All right. John?
The only thing I was going to add to this is, oh, now I lost my train of thought. Never mind. I'll come back to it.
All right. And of course, between now and our board meeting discussions on this, if anybody thinks of anything, shoot an email to Rick and he'll look into it and put it out to all the board members, the question and answer. John, you had your hand up again. Did your train come back?
My squirrel came back, yes. Thoughts on doing a survey to the parents with their thoughts on coming back to school in the fall. Are they comfortable with, butts and seats? Are they comfortable with virtual academy? Are they comfortable with a hybrid? It may not be a bad idea to just get a survey from parents to give us an understanding of what their thoughts are with their kids for planning purposes. Because I know we still had that, we did at one point have access to SurveyMonkey.
Yeah, we do
And-
have that account, and I can show you that right now. As of right now, we have 786 responses to our survey. Let me screen share. The question that you asked just now, John, we asked 10 questions. How many students do you have at home? What grade will your children be in? So that's a little bit of information. Do you have reliable working internet at home? Right now, 87, almost 88% of the people are saying yes. Around 900 people would be about half of the email addresses or half of the families. So we're close to half of the families that we serve responding to the survey. And at each level of response, the percentages have been pretty much the same. When I checked it and we only had 200 respondents, the numbers were roughly the same. About 90% of the people are saying that they have reliable internet at home. How many TPS issued computer devices do you currently have in your home? Most of the numbers are 0 or 1. How many working non-TPS devices do you have? 1 and 2 is the primary number in that answer stream. If school returns to full online instruction, how many devices would you need? We asked that question. 0 or 1 make up 75% of the respondents. This one was interesting. The level of confidence in their ability to participate in distance learning on a scale, they're only at about 55% confident. So that's telling us that not a lot of people are in love with the idea of being online. Most of their concerns about full online instruction are their ability to support multiple children on the online version. Rigor, the amount and the quality of work. I think that they're really kind of reacting to what has been done so far in the continuity of learning plan. It was not as hearty as it would be in the fall when accountability would be back in place. And then a lot of people interested in validity, making sure that kids are actually doing their own work. So here's the question that you asked. If school returns in person at any time during the 2021 school year, how likely are you to send your children back to school? 57% are very likely, 17% likely, and 8% somewhat likely. So that all tabulates to about 83% of the people saying that they would be some version of likely to send their kid back to school. So we're talking about this in our planning sessions moving for next year. You have to have a plan in place for if 85% of the people are comfortable sending their kids back at some point during the school year. What do you do with the other 15 to 18%? Can they be just transferred to the TVA? How does curriculum match so that if there's a vaccine in February and everybody wants back in, how does that work? So this Distance Learning Action Committee is the group that's working on this information. But the survey's out there and we're encouraging people to continue to interact with it so that we get as many, get as close to accuracy as possible. And then there's almost 400 comments and they range from their concerns about the internet to concerns about rigor and things like that. So haven't gotten completely through it yet, but yeah, the questions are being asked.
Well, to that, I think that the home environment is much different than the school environment when it comes to education. I mean,
Yeah.
some people pull off the homeschooling, some people pull off the TVA, and I think they do a pretty good job of it. However, overall, when you take the students out of the school environment with the teacher and the structure and you put them at home, they're not in their structured learning environment. They've been conditioned to that environment for learning. Now they're in their playing with their brothers and sisters and fun and more relaxing environment. I think that would be a big adjustment for people. It might take a whole school year before kids get acclimated to that. If worst case scenario, we're forced to stay out of school when we go back.
Right.
All right, I don't see any hands. Are there any comments to add here? Well, it doesn't look like it, so let's see, that was it for our agenda, I do believe, right?
Yeah, that's all for
Yes, indeed.
tonight. We'll update our projection sheets and have more information for you on Monday. More discussion, potentially another workshop, and then we'll get to the final budget projections.
All right. Well, with that, this is technically not a meeting, so I don't think we need a formal vote for adjournment. So we can call this meeting adjourned.
Okay.
Everyone have a wonderful night, and we will see you all on Monday.
Okay, good night.
Kevin and Becky, we were going to talk to you about the agenda for Monday night after you shut the live stream off. Maybe we could just have a conversation.
Sure.